This is Keys to the Shop, live interviews from Coffee Fest, Los Angeles and Pacific Northwest in 2022, Part 2. Well, hey everybody, this is Chris DeFurio with Keys to the Shop, and welcome to the second part of this live interview series from Coffee Fest trade shows. We are ending a series today with these 3 interviews that were conducted on the show floor of either Los Angeles or the Pacific Northwest show of 2022 at Coffee Fest. You know, Coffee Fest has been going for 30 years. That's 3 decades of providing amazing lectures and workshops, trainings, and panel discussions and competitions. It is an incredible resource to the coffee industry. Free or accessibly priced opportunities for growth and betterment of yourself and your team. There's a ton going on here, and it happens 4 times every year. This year it is in New York, then in Louisville, Kentucky, Anaheim, California, and then Orlando, Florida. Go to coffeefest.com and find out more information and get yourself and your team signed up today to go to these trade shows. I've been going to Coffee Fest actively since 2004. Almost been 20 years. Each time I go, I'm just refreshed, energized, and my feet are a little tired. I may have drank too much coffee, but I'm just always better for it. And so I know you're going to feel the same way if you go to coffeefest.com, get signed up today, and I will see you at Coffee Fest. Okay, now today we're going to be finishing our 2-part series of live interviews from Coffee Fest from back in 2022. We are going to be talking with Shad Baiz of La Marzocco. Then we're going to be talking with Jeremy Lyman of Birch Coffee, and finally Melind John of Josuma Coffee. Now, to start us off, we're going to be talking all about automation and technological innovation with Shad Baiz. Shad Baiz is a second-generation espresso machine technician who worked in Seattle for his father at Visions Espresso Services and Espresso Northwest for Kent Baki and John Maxwell at ESI. And while completing college, Shad worked for Carl Clauda at Espresso Express, where he serviced the Northern California market. And in 2000, Shad founded Solutions Espresso Services in San Diego. Along with operating Solutions Espresso Services, Shad is also the sales director for the Southwest region of La Marzocco USA. And safe to say that Shad knows his way around espresso machines and coffee equipment. He's one of our industry's best, and I wanted to talk with him about automation, technological innovation, and what do we have to be scared of in terms of automation? Is it always good? Is it sometimes bad? Does it take some of the romance and craft out of making craft coffee? Shad has some opinions, and we have a great dialogue around technology, its place in coffee, how it's made things so much better, and what we need to do to embrace it as it continues to evolve and change the way that we serve coffee to people. And so I was really happy to get a chance to talk with Shad. A really great person, and like I said, one of our industry's best, so it was a real treat. Here now is my conversation with Shad Baiz of La Marzocco USA. Shad, welcome to this live edition of Keys to the Shop. How are you?
I'm well, thanks. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, it's great to have you. Even before we started talking officially on the tape here, we were chatting about technology and what is the future of technology, the intersection of, I guess, people and machines. Not to get all like Sarah Connor and whatnot here, but seriously, you work with La Marzocco and with equipment, and you talk to people about, you know, their machine selection and helping them get the most out of their equipment a lot. This is part of what you do on the West Coast here. So I guess my first question is, what do you consider the number one thing that people should understand about technology in espresso equipment and what it can do for their shop? Because I feel like people feel technology can just kind of make them successful right away. But there's got to be kind of a letdown a little bit that you can walk people through and say, like, there's, you know, maybe it's not exactly that. Talk to us a little bit about the most common kind of conversation that's a eye-opening experience for a lot of people with coffee machines.
The revelation that the espresso machine's a tool and that the technology that's in it is theirs to choose whether it works for them or not. Much like I always throw it back to, I had a instructor in college who was never used a computer failure as a reason to not have a thoroughly reported paper or, anything like that. That there's a pencil and there's a ruler, and you can make a graph with that just as well as a computer can generate one for you. And there's a similar experience in the espresso machine adoption, that the espresso machine's a tool, and you need to use it as the tool that works for you and what you're trying to achieve. And technology plays different roles in different places in that process, depending on your end goal.
Okay, yeah. So the end goal for most people is, I want a great tasting coffee, and I want tell me if I'm right here, I want my baristas to make great coffee consistently, and that's it.
Right. Well, that one magic word, consistently, I think is a great point to start the conversation and drill down. And what sort of training program do you have in place? Who's doing the training? Is there somebody with an amazing amount of skill and technique and patience there bringing people into that coffee making process, or not? That begins an opportunity to start to discuss where technology might solve some problems.
In your mind here, and what you've experienced, is it's always going to be based on people and the relationships that people have to each other to make a piece of equipment do what you want it to do or not, right?
Yeah, that sounds very fair.
Okay. And so now, with espresso equipment out there that is advancing in its technology, there's all sorts of innovations happening to make it easier to make great coffee and easier to make something consistent. How does somebody buy a piece of equipment like that and use it responsibly in a way to not let people off the hook because there's technology? Because I think a lot of people have talked to me like, hey, I just want to buy this piece of equipment because it has pieces of technology on it that I don't have to train my baristas. It'll just do it. You know what I mean? Speak to that a little bit.
Well, it's a challenging perception, and maybe that's one of the myths or perceptions that we could attempt to dispel, that there isn't a specialty coffee program in a box,
right,
that you plug in and put on the counter, right? There's all the responsibility and the vision and the care and attention all still has to remain. So that's a place to start, I think.
Okay. But why?
Well, why? Because you certainly will fail.
I mean, the equipment is supposed to do it, though, Shad. Right?
Yes.
But that's not what you say in the marketing. Like, it's not like plug and play.
Right. Right.
But people assume that.
They do. We have wonderful marketers in our industry, and I think that message is out there. As with any professional experience, and whether it's entrepreneurial or whatever, as you dig in deeper, you're going to find all those moments where it's your responsibility or your decision making that makes the end product, and that nobody's going to replace that with a machine.
Right, right.
So I think that translates through that, and you have to have an amazing program. At certain times, a very automated espresso machine might be a part of that amazing program, but it has to be executed properly. Okay,
let's talk about those certain times. I'm really interested in that, because
you're going to ask the La Marzocco guy to talk about those programs?
I would love to hear a little bit about, because, well, La Marzocco offers a range from very manual to very, not automated necessarily, but things that have a lot of technology packed inside for those of us who want to really geek out about things. But then there are people who just want to pull a lever, the lever, machines that have different pieces of technology. So case use, who is the type, or how do I know if I'm the type where I want something that has a lot more technology in it, or it's better for me, versus somebody who doesn't want anything? They want more analog, so to speak.
Hospitality, general large-scale hospitality is probably the case that comes to mind most readily, where you really are combating high turnover, and I don't want this to come across the wrong way. I'm going to say the word unskilled labor What I mean by that specifically is unskilled in specialty coffee and the processes that we all go through when we're making specialty coffee drinks.
That's clear. Yeah.
Yeah. That is the case in point where those highly automated machines do seem to shine and remove a lot of the variability and inconsistencies that poorly executed preparation of specialty coffee drinks can lead to.
Right. Okay. And then the opposite would be if you have a labor force that you're really ready to invest training into and create that more like personal experience and curation of the dial and everything else, then something more analog would be a lot more your speed, presumably.
Yeah, I agree. Yes, and I think there is room for innovation and automation in that space also. I think the Swift grinder comes to mind for me.
Right.
Where that using and operating a Swift grinder still relies on your ability and your fundamental skills as a barista. You're still dialing in, you're still attentive to the shot quality. It's just removing the one move that negatively impacts your body, the twist of the wrist and the vertical tamping pressure. So I think that automation and innovation in those realms is important.
So it's a better tool that doesn't work itself. You use it, just like any tool. And like KB90, for example, like on the show, obviously, we talk about this in our commercial for La Marzocco a lot. With the straight-in locking portafilter thing is a big deal because that's an ergonomic improvement. You still have to lock in a portafilter. It doesn't do it for you.
Yep, that's a great example. Yep.
There are robots now, apparently, that are making coffee, though. Robot arms.
Well, I think that's the part where you really are talking about replacing the human. And I think that's where the craft coffee, the concept of craft, any type of craft, right, really requires that human attention and that human, I think, what do we say, your ability to analyze and intuit what's happening, taking the inputs that are coming at you from the coffee and from the beverage as it's being prepared, interpreting those, and then executing on delivery to affect the beverage or to affect whatever that end product is. That's a part that you can't remove from the process wholly and still have a craft product.
Okay, and then some people might argue against that and say it's craft because it was roasted craft and it's being served by a machine. And then, so I guess we can get into the weeds of that a little bit, if we will. But
yes, we could.
Yeah. I mean, who is the determiner of craft in coffee? And tell me what you think of this, because I've always thought about it as where there is a focus and intentionality, there is craft in some level. And when you remove intentionality, you start to get lowered expectations. And so the craft part of it starts to suffer. And maybe a machine can make a really tasty cup of coffee. But is that really all we're wanting? Is a tasty coffee, or do we want to taste the intentionality also?
Yeah, I mean, I would certainly argue that I do believe that we taste the intentionality. I think there's, where you have variability, and the opportunity for things to drift, or I think that's where all that magic happens. And I think that maybe just to hold on to that thread, that yes, there's the moment where the roaster has done their job and they've executed it perfectly. There's environmental factors and all sorts of other forces that can act on that coffee before it makes it into a cup, right? And quality control people need to be in place, and then you can sort of see the barista as the final arbiter of that moment of quality control. That's just for the espresso portion of that moment. Then there's still the building of the drink and the what's going into it.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, and this is the kind of thing, and I feel like we're on the same wavelength. Like maybe you and I are of the ilk that want to see a person be the intentional hands that intuits whether a shot needs to be re-pulled. It's questionable whether or not a robot arm or a hyper-automated process would recognize it and be like, you know what? Give a second, I'm going to re-pull that shot for you. That would be scary if that ever happened. Yeah.
Indeed.
but we're not there yet. And so kind of dialing it back to like the here and now and not the, Elon Musk conversation here with the AI and whatnot. When we're talking about technologies that owners really need to be aware of and maybe embrace going forward with their coffee bars, what are the things that you would recommend to people that will just make their lives easier, but they still have to learn a little bit about to adopt? Because a lot of people are just aware of coffee technologies that have existed for decades and decades, and they don't want to make a change. They need to be convinced. Help them convince them.
I think the biggest moment there is speed of production. I think that's where there's a wonderful technologies, which are many of them not new. Volumetrics are not new. They've been around since the 80s, But that type of adoption of technology, allowing the barista to have a little more space, mental space, and having their eyes up and out into the bar a little bit more, but maintaining the speed of service and that same level of quality of service is extremely useful. And then on the learning side, I think that's where scales and brewing by weight starts to really come into play. I think that's, further stepping down the road of culinary excellence and culinary execution. So adopting that into your process and hopefully adopting it into the technology of the espresso machine, I think is very powerful.
Yeah, kind of going back to that consistency word, to keep it all consistent, those technologies like the built-in scales or the automation in the volumetrics is a lot better than it's been around, but it's more accurate now.
Yes, much more.
And I don't know if people realize that. Like you use the word volumetrics, like people say, well, it does have volumetrics, but it was made in 1984 or whatever.
Yes,
not the same.
Yes, it's improved greatly. Yeah.
And so, in what ways have maybe common technologies that we've had around for a while improved? Is it just that the mechanisms inside the machine have a more, like we say, accuracy? Is it just that the computer systems that operate some of these things are more sophisticated and therefore make better judgments of the volume that's passed by, et cetera? What's behind that?
Yeah, it is. It's processing power. It's how much, what you can pack onto the computer, that's driving that. A flow meter from 1984 from Chigar is probably going to look very similar to a flow meter from today. From its machining and tolerances and things like that. But the ability of the sensors to be accurate and then the computer to process those impulses is just, they can be predictive, things like that, which is just amazing, I think.
Explain predictive.
Meaning that they can be tuned, not by the user, but at the factory level. The computers can be tuned to eliminate errors intrinsic to the flow meter itself, right? So it can really program over this many pulses, it's this amount of water, and it can hold on to that in a much better way.
So it'll prematurely stop it, knowing that it's going to have a wind down and put so much water through while it's winding down or something like that?
It's sort of. That sort of thing would be more with a scale, seeing a flow rate, being able to interpret it and then shut it off ahead or slow down. That happens more at the scales than in real time than it does with a flow meter.
Okay.
With the flow meters themselves, that happens more at the factory level. They're just going to find out what its output is per pulses and have that stored.
Scales, too, gotten better.
Scales have gotten amazingly better.
And now they're connected, to the cloud, and you can figure out your different origins that you're using. Mm-hmm. If you're a multi-roaster shop, of course, you service a lot of different concepts of coffee bars, and that's challenging in and of itself, because if you're a multi-roaster shop, you're bringing in a lot of different people's expressions of coffee, which means varying densities, origins, and styles that your equipment needs to be prepared to handle. Would you suggest that somebody with a multi-roaster shop have a more sophisticated machine that can, be tuned to these different coffees quickly, or?
I certainly would say it's worth exploring. I believe that's the genesis of the Strata EP.
Okay.
That is the ultimate goal of the Strata EP, is to be able to have ultimate flexibility across multiple parameters to accommodate specific coffees. I don't know that everybody needs to go there just because they are a multi-roaster, but it's worth exploring depending on how granular you want to get with the coffees you're bringing in.
Yeah, that makes sense. So when you think about technology and innovation in coffee equipment, where do you think craft coffee or specialty coffee will be in the next 10 years, do you think? Where are we heading now that is clear that we're going there?
It's a great question. I wish I was a visionary. I'm not sure that I am. I feel like I might be more of a reactionary to things. I will say my experience, coffee technology and the expression of coffee has been very cyclical. Depending on where you drop the dot, it may or may not look particularly different than what it looks like today. The tools may be more advanced. There may be more, more, like I said, more or less barista engagement at different moments in the process. But I feel like I don't have a good answer for you there.
It's all right.
It really, it's an ever-expanding world. It's continuing to be broadened and expanded and more inclusive in so many ways. The veil being pulled back on roasting, for example, is just a massive change for me. That's amazing. The expression, the opportunity for personal expression and expression in general is so much more vast than it's ever been in my history in coffee.
So what you mean, like the ability to control the roaster itself and the outcomes of the roaster?
I know maybe more democratization of coffee roasting, the access to the information, the access to education about it. So you see people with fewer and fewer resources having access to be able to roast. Maybe there's less barriers of entry.
So there's roasting equipment like Bellwether out there. You can roast for your cafe. You could probably go beyond that to mail order. There's the Stronghold roaster. And is it Roastronics is the same company, I'm not sure, but there's other types of equipment that, does democratize it, but the information, like when I read, Scott Rao, people like him that democratize that information and put it out there, and it's really informative. One post on Instagram has more information about roasting than you could find in 5 years back in the 90s, right?
Exactly, yes. Exactly, and that's amazing to me. And so where will that lead us? I'm not sure. But I do know that technologically we have amazing infrastructure out there for the variety of types of machines we can build, the types of, if you have a particular extraction that you're passionate about and you're going to really push on, the manufacturers in our space are there to do it. They're there to help and push that with you. So I see that as a bright future in that space. I just don't know where it's going to land.
Well, good. I think if we did know, we probably would be like either really upset or just, happy and give up.
Yeah.
I don't know. But you bring up a really interesting point with how responsive manufacturers are to where we want things to go, or our desires as not consumers necessarily, but as professionals in that B2B world, right? Mm-hmm. I don't know that was always the case because, you got your equipment and it was what it was. And it took decades of competitions, exploration, aftermarket modifications to really just push manufacturers in the direction of being hyper-focused on, baristas and barista culture. And not that they weren't focused before, but it feels like it's a much more culturally, it's on a peer level right now. You know what I mean? So the technology is not only advancing, but so is our connection to people that actually machine the tools that we use. I wouldn't know who makes tampers and who makes, the burrs for my grinders and things like that. But now they all have Instagram accounts again, and you can see them, putting out a podcast interview or something talking about these things. It's pretty interesting.
Yeah, I think it's very interesting, and I share your experience. That certainly was not always the way, but I really champion baristas specifically who built that bridge. I think that that's a bridge that was built by baristas. It was built from their passion, their experience with the equipment, their willingness to share that experience and hold somebody responsible for what, if it was moving forward or not. I think that's where that came from, and I'm so happy to see that it is where it is now. But you're right, It's taken 20 years to really do that. I'd love to use the example, the GB5 wouldn't have existed without the WBC, I don't believe.
Oh, yeah.
I believe that really pushed, the Linea Classic held its place as one of the most, if not the most temperature stable machine in the market, right up until we bumped up against competitive baristas.
Okay, and that was just a real-time exploration of what the possibilities are on the edge of quality, and we continue to do that in coffee. And now with these technologies, it almost feels like espresso equipment, in a sense, has opened up the possibility for roasting to improve, where now I can really say, this equipment's pretty spot on, so we're going to shine a light on this coffee, and then we'll adjust it and see if that worked. Whereas before, as a roaster, you're working with unstable equipment, you can't really know whether or not that batch of espresso blend was great on your part, or was it a fail on the barista's part?
Right, are you temperature surfing and you just hit that sweet temperature that hadn't been at before?
Mm-hmm.
And then maybe you couldn't repeat it.
And where do we go when all the coffee is great? And it's back to the technology. Like, we just say, now that we're here, let's get a robot. Let's get a robot to do it. I don't know. But it's true. Like, there is coffee. You could throw, I've said before, you could throw a dart at a map, and wherever it lands, you could probably find a specialty coffee shop. At least here in the U.S., that is true, and technology has allowed that to happen.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think it's fantastic.
Yeah. So now, talk to us a little bit here as we wrap up about when people are going through the process of opening a coffee shop, or let's say that they want to upgrade their equipment, what would you suggest their thinking or framework be when they're making that decision? Because it could be easy to even look at the catalog of equipment that you represent with Amorzocco and choose something that's impractical, not the right piece of equipment for them. I mean, hooray, a sale, but you want people to get the right equipment.
Yeah.
So they have to do some due diligence in thinking that direction. So how do you suggest people go about that?
Reach out for the resources. Your espresso machine choice, much like I would imagine bar design in general, is not something that you want to research in your own space without external input and just develop opinions about. Mm-hmm. Go out and talk to the professionals. Call us at Amorzocco and talk to us about our equipment, and allow us to hear what your project involves and how that all goes. Mm-hmm. Talk to your technical professionals in the area, look them up, see what's working and what you might need to support your equipment in your bar, in your area. Talk to the coffee roasters in your area. And we have a robust consultative environment in this industry. Use it.
Yeah.
It's worth every penny.
That's good advice. Yeah, that's right. You can use. You're pointing at my consulting literature here at the table. I love it. And that's great because it just makes it easier to weigh those options with somebody who knows how to answer your questions. And I guess it's easy to want to think, I want to have researched enough to sound intelligent when I'm talking to you on the phone. You know what I mean? Like, I'm an owner. So it's just as simple as saying, maybe, should they prepare a little bit is what I'm asking. Like, should they take into account footfall, their particular menu, and other things?
No, I don't think they have to be that far down the road. I think that they should start that dialogue as early as possible.
Okay. Yeah,
There's a lot of, because sometimes people are not all the way there and they're 3/4 of the way through a build out, or they're already speccing electrical configurations for their space or something like that. I think that reaching out as soon as possible across the board, I think, is just great.
Yeah.
And maybe I would be a fan of trying to not have that hurdle of feeling like you need to be prepared. You can always come back. If you feel like it was overwhelming or the conversation wasn't really what you needed because you weren't prepared to discuss that moment.
Yeah.
Go back and research, take the information that you will have received, which will be valuable and impactful to you, and then come back a month down the road, or talk to 5 other people and build a new war chest of questions, and then come back.
That's good. Be patient, come back, give yourself enough time. That's great advice. Yeah. Shad, it's been great to talk to you. Where can people reach out to you and maybe talk to you about these things?
I've got an email address. It's shad@lamarzocco.com.
Okay.
And they can always call the La Marzocco main number and get put through to me. And honestly, if you'd like it, I'm a fan of giving out my cell phone number.
Yeah, go ahead.
And that's 619-279-0047. I'm open for it.
Nice. Excellent. Thank you, Shad.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Well, I hope that you enjoyed that. I definitely did. And, these are topics that I think we can wrestle with, but ultimately we understand that technology, espresso is a technological brew. It is only possible through machinery. And when we talk about how technology and automation fits into what we do in coffee shops and making coffee, I think we just need to realize that these are tools, and these are tools for us to craft something. And ultimately what we're crafting is an experience through coffee. And so I'm really grateful for Shad being able to give us some perspective here and offer his thoughts on the subject of automation and technological advancement and how we can embrace this going forward. So a big thank you to Shad. Of course, I would encourage you to check out lamarzocousa.com and also follow Shad on LinkedIn. And you can go ahead and look at the show notes to find that link to do so. Now, next up, we're going to be talking with a ubiquitous teacher at Coffee Fest. We're always seeing this guy around. He is just dispensing wisdom to the masses in the form of lectures and workshops around business management and entrepreneurship, leadership development. Now we're talking with Jeremy Lyman of Birch Coffee. He is the founder of Birch Coffee in New York City, and you might recognize the name if you're not new to Keys to the Shop. Episode 300 was the Founder Friday with Jeremy and Keys to the Shop. That was a great hours-long discussion about the evolution of that business. And if you listen to that show, or if you know anything about Jeremy, you'll know that not only is his heart into evolving himself and his company around great leadership. In the case of today's interview with Jeremy, he was presenting some talks in LA on hiring and getting a great dream team for your coffee shop. And obviously, this is something that every entrepreneur in coffee shops is constantly struggling with, is the idea of how to hire the right people, how to train them, how to provide an environment where they are supported and they support you. And that's why the word dream team is used, because, what are the things that you dream about as a coffee shop owner? Well, Jeremy breaks this down in his conversation today with us as we talk about the way that they've gone about getting employees, collecting applications, holding people accountable, developing self-awareness as leaders to know the difference between something that's a you thing or a them thing, how much patience and grace to have with people, and much more. So this is a really rich conversation. And as usual, Jeremy is poised and ready to share some really great knowledge with us. So I think this is kind of like a hiring and personnel masterclass from Jeremy Lyman. So I'm really happy to feature this today. So let's get right to it. Here now is my conversation on the show floor of Coffee Fest with Jeremy Lyman. Jeremy, welcome.
Chris, thank you.
My little booth here at Keys to the Shop headquarters at Coffee Fest, I guess.
Yeah, you know, I will say, so this booth and my booth as well is the same size as my shop that is opening in 3 weeks.
Really?
110 square feet. It is 8 feet wide by 13 feet deep.
I don't know why, but that sounds like a dream to me.
I'm beyond excited.
Wow.
My
Congrats.
staff isn't necessarily so
Well, everyone
excited.
feels like they need more space until they realize just how efficient a small cafe is.
Yeah. No, it's amazing. The bathroom is up a ladder.
Okay, well, I'm starting to rethink a little bit. Yeah.
But it's like in a house where you pull down the panel and the ladder comes down, like to go up to the attic.
Got it.
It's that kind of ladder. Yeah.
Wow, what an adventure, I guess. New York City, though, with the small spaces, you guys are pretty inventive.
We have to be.
Yeah.
And I told people this morning what I was paying in rent for that location, and they were just blown away because it's a lot.
Really? Oh,
yeah.
It's what it is. What it is.
It's what it is. The volume's there, right? So
Yep.
in New York City, the volume is there.
So you, in all of your experience in running coffee shops, and we've had you on for Founder Friday for Birch Coffee, and it was a lovely interview.
Thank you. My aunt, who I'm not particularly close with, she called me and left me a message and said she was forwarded the podcast from somebody else. And she went on. It was wonderful, and it was just, it was a very proud moment for her, which was really nice, and it was great. And I felt really solid about that conversation that we had. It was just, it helped me listening after the fact. So,
wow, that's really cool to hear.
Yeah, it was great. It was great. Aunt Merrill.
Merrill.
If Aunt Merrill is listening to this next one,
hope you enjoy this conversation just as much.
Just as much.
We got to raise the bar now.
Yeah.
There's a few things. You've given at least 5 talks here at Coffee Fest, at this particular one in LA, and one of them is on hiring. And your talks tend to be around leadership and hiring and obviously all the other things that go into running a coffee shop. But you mentioned to me just a second ago that hiring is one of your favorite things to talk about. And in particular, we want to talk about building a team. So let me just start off by asking, why is it one of the things you like talking about, hiring?
So my absolute favorite thing to talk about is customer service, which that's what I've been speaking about at Coffee Fest for many, many years now. The staffing piece has only been fairly recent. And as I've developed the class more and more, I found that I am enjoying the process of talking about it, but also learning about it a lot more as well. People are absolutely fascinating, right?
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
And to build the kind of team that we want to build within our organization is very challenging. We're very specific as to who we want to bring on. We want to bring on people that want to be there, that are not looking at just filling time and just making a little bit of money between doing one thing and something else. And that can be very challenging. It's been more challenging over the last few years, obviously. And we've often had to say no a lot more often than we'd like to say no.
Okay.
Because someone is just not necessarily the best fit for the organization. So when we interview, I mean, there's so many different things that we look for. And not that we didn't look for these things before, but we always, eye contact, how a person looks at you, how a person smiles at you.
Yeah.
We always say we can teach coffee, but we can't teach someone how to have a different personality. And because customer service is such an important aspect to our business, someone who can't perform at that level and give a customer the kind of service that we need them to provide, it sometimes won't work. And sometimes the best decisions we make are the ones where we decide not to bring somebody on.
Wow. Yeah, that's heavy.
Yeah.
I mean, when I hear you say you, especially lately and recently, and you know, there's a lot of things that you've learned over the years that you're improving your systems, you're learning about how we made these decisions before might not be the way that we need to make decisions now. Is that more because you have grown in size and the needs are different, or is it because you've just said, these have always been things that are important to us, we just realize it a lot more now and we're less willing to budge?
Maybe it's a combination of both and maybe a few other things, but what's happened is obviously there have been labor challenges which have been across the board throughout, I mean, everywhere. But I also don't like to point my finger at that being the reason for us being in a tight spot.
Why not?
Because at the end of the day, it is my responsibility to figure out if I can't find employees in one area, I need to go elsewhere. I need to look somewhere else. And there are people that want to work.
Area. What do you mean by that?
So, I mean, a labor pool.
Okay.
So a labor pool. So if I'm looking at just people, and we're not putting out in advertising, you must be between this age and like that doesn't, obviously we don't do that. We put them in certain, publications, and whether we're doing it on Craigslist or however we're looking, if that is not working and the people that are applying are not necessarily working out once they've been brought on, then we need to be looking at figuring out where else to look. So, there are people that have homeless programs where we can be potentially bringing in people who are in need of work and maybe struggling to find work. And so
right.
It's where we're looking. And if we're not looking everywhere in all different places because one specific area is not working, I think it's on us.
Do you feel like it's almost a leading question, so I apologize because
okay.
I kind of I'm showing my hand here as to how I feel, but it's like we hang our shingle and it feels like we want people to just find us, and we don't want to go out and get them. So we set up, and applications are not coming in, resumes are not coming in, and we just sit there and say, what can I do to get behind the computer and make them come in instead of going out there and getting them? Do you find that that's kind of the default for most people, is like kind of passively angsty, just wanting them to come in but not really doing the work to get them?
Well, maybe that's how it is for some people. I think it'd be nice if everyone just came to us, but we have to give people different ways to approach us. So we put a QR code in every single store that says we're hiring. Because at first it was just an email. And it was like, hey, send us an email with your resume. I guess that wasn't easy enough. So then we put in a QR code people would put in, they would attach their resume. So we've been getting people applying, but we've been just actively doing that more. We've been putting out more ads. We've been making sure that we're making it easier to access. If you go to our website, it's like one of the first things you see on the website that we're hiring. I was in Chicago for Coffee Fest, and my partner and I, we went to eat somewhere, and the experience we had with this person behind the counter was exceptional. She was exceptional. It was great. We felt really good about our experience with her. Food was totally fine. Before we left, I happened to have business cards on me, which I never have. We're in New York.
Yeah.
Which I never have. And I walked over and I said, hello. I said, you're in Chicago. I know you're in Chicago. I said, I think you are amazing at what you do. If you ever find yourself in New York City, here's my email. Give me a shout.
Okay.
And we left it at that. Paul went in the next day, and she was just so ecstatic. And she said to him, my boyfriend is actually thinking of relocating to New York. And so, I may be hitting you up within the next 6 months. And Paul's like, that's amazing.
Like kismet.
So, there are things like that happen, but you have to be going out and reaching out for those things. And I can very easily do that in New York. I don't like to go to other coffee shops and poach. I do not like to do that,
right.
And I don't want anybody to do that on my team. But if I'm in a restaurant or if I'm at a Trader Joe's and I just get this really incredible experience, I am absolutely going to pass along my information.
And that's a sign of respect to other coffee shops that
absolutely.
It's just like, we're not going to do each other
I wouldn't
like
want
that.
someone to do it to us.
Exactly.
Which does happen. It does happen.
Yeah, and because it's very competitive, especially now. But okay, so going out there, making sure that you're on all the time, and that your mindset, though, has to be you have to determine that you're recruiting all the time. And in your position, you have how many stores now?
There's 11. We're
11.
going to be opening our 11th. Yeah.
So the thought might be, now I have 2 stores. Easy for Jeremy with 11 stores to be constantly worried about recruiting, so he's just going to have his cards on him. But we're in a small town, and everyone knows everyone. So if we post it up, everyone already knows about it. I mean, it's hard to get people to get into the doors of a small town versus New York.
Right. There's a lot more people in New York, for sure.
Yeah.
But people talk. Right? And if you have a business and you have 2 stores and you're in a small town, and the experience in the shop that for people that are working within the organization is just incredible. People talk about that stuff.
Yes.
And then they want their friends to work alongside them, and that's what happens. That's what happens in our store as well. It's so we get people who, I mean, that's the best compliment is when someone recommends somebody else. Because it says to us, I enjoy working here, and so much so that I'm inviting my friend to even just apply.
Yeah.
So it's about the experience that they have working in the store. And I think all that comes down to culture, how you're building that, and how you're hiring, and how you're training, and how you're training before you're training, which is
a whole nother thing. Yeah. I mean, okay, so your reputation precedes you. This is something I believe as well, that people know you. Even if you don't know what you're putting out there, the reason maybe you don't get as many resumes is because people are not super, super excited about what you're putting out there. That could be. You have to explore that, figure out what the reality is of what people, see you putting out there versus what you really hope you are. Because they could be two different things.
correct.
And
You
so,
could think you're doing this unbelievable job. It's like everybody loves us, and they're like, oh, no.
no, we don't. We're just,
No.
we have the service face on, we have the nice customer face on, but we're not recommending you when we don't have to. So, okay, well, let's talk a little bit about the idea of when we're bringing somebody on, I guess, first of all, what's the biggest mistake that you have to walk people through that they make around hiring? Besides the idea of where to find people, when it comes to making bad hiring decisions versus good hiring decisions, what do you commonly see happening in specialty coffee?
I would say the worst hiring decisions that people make is around scarcity. And people are very quick to hire when they feel like they need to bring somebody on to fill a certain position. And they feel pressure from other people that are working within the store that they don't have enough support. And so sometimes I think that's going to cloud our judgment as to who we're bringing on and making sure that they're absolutely the best possible person for that role. A lot of times people will hire somebody because they're awesome, but they don't necessarily fit the job responsibility. If you need somebody to work on weekends and you meet someone and they're just absolutely amazing and they can only work Monday through Thursday, it still leaves you in the same position because now you want to bring this person on, they're awesome, but now you have to say to your other people, hey, I need to move your shifts around so that now you're working on Saturday and Sunday because I couldn't pass this person up. So when you're trying to fit a role around an individual, I think that's where you can end up falling short. You can keep that person on record, and if something else comes up, or just hire them and then still hire somebody else that will fit that role for Saturday, Sunday. But that's one thing. And then I think, there's this vicious cycle where you have somebody who is just not a good fit. You know they're not a good fit. They know they're not a good fit. Everyone else in the organization knows this person is just not fit to be working here because they're late all the time, whatever it is. But if you let that person go, then you're without a shift. And now all of this time is going to fall on all these other people. They're going to be stressed out. And so you keep that person and you keep them working. And then they just start to slowly impact all of the other people that are working.
Yes.
And it spreads.
Yep.
And then by the time you finally find somebody to replace that person, you have to replace 3 other people.
Yeah.
It's wild.
No, that happens all the time.
All the time.
Yeah.
And so what I like to say is that the person that you want to terminate but feel like you can't because then you're going to be left with this hole, they can quit at a moment's notice and leave you in exactly the same spot that you were if you let them go.
Yeah.
And people don't think about that. And that is very much a reality.
And so we're always operating in this on the edge kind of scenario where we just kind of are being held hostage by bad hires.
Yep.
Not bad people, just bad hires.
Just bad hires.
And now we don't want to make a move because everything feels so fragile. It's like running with nitroglycerin. We're like, my gosh, I can't do anything. So you saying that is it's already kind of a tense situation. You don't even realize it. You're not in control. In other words, that's
No.
what I hear you saying. You're not
Yeah.
in control, so you might as well just make the move when you can.
Yeah. So I said that in a class yesterday, and some guy said he had heard somebody say, "You're better off left with a hole than with an a-hole." But he said the whole word. And
Yeah.
it's true.
Yeah.
It's totally true.
And in the end, maybe it means your manager or you yourself have to fill the position, but it would be better for you to be stressed out and know with some certainty that you could, that's temporary until
Yeah.
you find somebody, than to know that this thing is metastasizing underneath your watch
Yeah.
to spread to those 3 people. And people might think, well, that sounds a little dramatic. But ask yourself the question, I think you might agree, haven't you been to coffee shops where it feels like the entire team is just of the same mind, and it's not the mind of service? It's really just like out of control, like pirates,
Yeah.
It happened because something along the line of hiring and letting people just take over. So when you do hire somebody, though, how do you not make the same mistake? Because you brought that person on. Now you
Yeah.
learn from your mistake, but you're going to be desperate at this time. But you're supposed to now think more clear-headedly about it, right? So how do we do that? How do we use our values, I guess, or what are your recommendations for learning from your mistakes and then hiring a better person?
So, like I said, we want to be hiring from a place of abundance, even though we don't feel like we have that abundance, as opposed to from scarcity, where we're operating from a place of fear, where it's like, oh my God, I need to fill this, I need to do this, and it's just, and you can't make a rational decision.
Yeah.
So it's really taking pausing and being able to look at the situation from above, that 30,000 foot view, which again is very easy for me to say now, and then as opposed to when I'm in it. There was I think this was before Chicago, we had a staffing meltdown, and there was 2 people had left. It was bad. And I was going to fly to Chicago and teach a class about leadership and staffing. and I said to Paul, my partner, I said, I don't know how I can do this. How can I speak to this work when I feel like this is where we're at?
Right.
I paused, and then I paused for a minute. I realized how hard I have a tendency of being on myself, where I will analyze my entire career on a snapshot of one moment of just utter chaos and think this is what my life has been for the last 10 years, when that's not real, that's not accurate.
Yeah.
You know, it's you walk into a movie, you watch 20 seconds of it, you leave, you can't say that was the worst movie that I've ever seen in my life, because you have no idea, because you don't know the context. And so it's so important to be able to just stop and take a look at things from a different perspective. I like to actually help out when we are short-staffed. I'll go in, I'll help break people, because they see that I'm coming in and I'm helping. That's number one. Also, I'm able to see what they're doing and how they're working, and if there's anything that I need to work on changing to make better, to improve.
Right.
But as far as figuring out the best people, it's always going to be a challenge, because you'll never know somebody within a couple of days. You'll know who you don't necessarily want, but there are people that interview well, there are people that train well, and that then just kind of give up after that. So what we like to do is we're very particular about how we engage people during an interview. Mm-hmm. We ask I guess they're make or break questions. We ask them about their scheduling, what they need, what they're looking for, and a lot of times if it doesn't fit, it won't fit and it won't work. And hopefully when they do make it through, it's a pre-training. So we do 2 days of training before we actually start training. We do that at our office. We do it at a group setting.
What does that entail? What does that mean?
So we have different exercises. I'd say it was maybe 4 years ago, I took level 1 and level 2 improv class.
Hey.
So that I could learn how to train better and train before we're training better. So
Very
there's tons of
interesting.
exercise. Yeah. It was the best thing I ever did. It made me so uncomfortable, so uncomfortable. But there's exercises where you can really get to know somebody on a much deeper level than you would just working alongside them for even weeks. So we engage them. There's a game we play which is called Zip, Zap, Zop. I don't know if you're familiar.
I'm not.
But it's all about eye contact. It's about listening skills. It's about watching people make eye contact with one another and just be very aware of their surroundings. We do questions and answers like Spitfire. Each person stands at the front of the room. Everyone just shoots off questions like, what's your favorite color? Do you play a musical instrument? All of these things. And again, it's to get to know people a little bit better, but it's also, is somebody asking the same question that somebody else just asked, the same person? And paying attention to how are they listening to everyone else? Are they making eye contact? Are they giving bizarre answers?
Yeah.
So it's another way for us to get to know people a little bit more. And then we built a fake store at our office. And so we do exchanges. We do, you go in, you order from the barista that's training.
Yeah.
We train people exactly how to do things.
Good.
And then once they're comfortable, once we feel like they're good to move on, we put them in a store.
And these
then
people
they
have already been hired.
So the minute somebody clocks in, they're hired.
Okay, so
and they clock in, they're paid for every minute.
During this time of this onboarding or this training,
Yep.
Zip, Zap, Zop, and
Yep.
the coffee shop that you have, the mini coffee shop, right?
Yep.
You could make a decision and be like, no.
That is correct.
Okay, so they are not hired yet until you say, congrats, you're on a shift.
So technically, they're hired the minute they come in for the pre-training.
Okay, yes.
New York it's an at-will. This is just to see how things go, and so we can let somebody go before they actually go into a store.
Have you ever done that?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah? Okay. Yeah. So you're dodging bullets, really, in a sense. By not, you're doing this whole thing to say, we could have been wrong in the interview process, and you got here, and now we're going to go through these exercises, and these exercises might root out some things we didn't see. Red flag goes up, you're like, oh, we're not going to hire this person.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, we're not going to put this person in the store. They're paid for their work. They're paid for their shifts, and we send them a check.
They're fully aware of this possibility, too.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We now have a lot of cashiers, and now we're training people up. And so now we can't train up coffee fast enough. So now we're working on that, and we're just going to keep moving along.
So
it's been much better.
That's good. That's good. After the training, though, you get people on the bar. So you've gone through all of this to get somebody to get on the clock that you're happy with, right? But then there's the follow-up after that where you could easily just say, like, good luck, let us know if you need anything. And a lot of people do. They just lose touch with their baristas. What do you do to encourage people to develop past their initial shift after this training and onboarding for developing them as a professional past that point?
Well, every store has basically a manager, right. And the biggest piece of their responsibility is to build a team, is to grow the people that are coming in, to make sure that they're following protocol exactly how it's supposed to be followed. Because the truth, too, is I can train people the standard protocol of every store, and they're all the same. It's all the same across every store, as far as taking orders, and obviously things are in different places.
Yeah.
But training is exactly the same. The script, the quote-unquote script that we have where they're engaging customers, it's the same, okay? Mm-hmm. When they go into a store, if somebody in that store is doing something a little bit different, they're not going to do what we've trained them. They're going to follow suit. They're going to flow exactly, they're going to fall into what it is that they're doing in the store because they don't want to feel left out.
Yeah.
And and there have been times where in the past where I've done training, I've said, and just full disclosure, whatever you hear in the store, whatever you see in the store that's different from what I am telling you today is wrong. Do what I'm saying.
Yeah. Okay.
But it doesn't happen. And then also it creates this rift because, They don't want to not do what I'm telling them to do, but now they see in the store there are people that are not doing what Jeremy trained.
And since they see the people in the store all the time, they're like, I'd rather
They do that.
piss off Jeremy in the future than piss
Right.
off my coworkers now.
That's correct. That is exactly what goes through their minds for sure. But it's the reality. They fall into it. They just fall into those bad habits. And they're not necessarily bad habits. They're just things that we think add time, which we want to avoid.
Okay.
So they'll ask, do you want a hot or an iced latte? We don't train them to ask that.
They know they might choose iced, and it's easier for them to pass it through or something like that.
Well, they think that somebody might miss asking for an iced latte, especially in the summer, and then they'll have to remake it.
Okay, I get
So
it.
that's why they say, would you like it hot or iced? I understand the reasoning behind it, but we believe that it just makes more sense to just remake it if they make the mistake. Because of how they're engaging with customers.
Okay, yeah.
Throughout.
It's a different place on the whole chain of communication to place value on.
Yeah.
And it's up to you to decide what that is.
Correct.
But when you're moving the salt shaker back to the middle to borrow the Danny Meyer, setting the table phrase, you know this kind of gap is between what you're training somebody to do and then what the store does. You just said managers are responsible for building the team, developing people, and making them accountable for the processes, right? So how does that work when you're maybe building your managers so that they can cut that part out, or at least down from what you're talking about, that gap between what's trained and what's real,
I mean, we rely on them heavily to let us know because, I'm not in the store on a daily basis, and they are. And so I need to respect the fact that maybe there's something that I'm missing.
And
They're
maybe
doing
you
it
have to change it.
Right.
Okay.
And we're certainly open to it. And we've never said, no, this is it. If someone comes to us and says, hey, we've actually been doing it this way for the last however long, and it's really, really been helpful. We'll say, okay, well, let's try it across all of the stores. Let's see how this actually works. If it does save time, let's change protocol.
Yeah.
I have no problem with that. But I've been doing what I've been doing for so long, and I do feel like I have a good handle on what is the most efficient way of doing things.
Yeah.
And so they just have to show me otherwise, and that's fine. We want to make it as functional and as fluid and as seamless as possible. We want to make the experience as good as possible for the customer and also for the barista.
Okay.
We're not trying to cut corners. We know they're not, but it's easier for them to do that if they feel like they have the liberty to do so, which they don't.
Nice.
Yeah.
Okay, so one of my final questions here is, I'm sure you've heard of this phrase that's going around about quiet quitting.
Yeah.
A little bit, like people are just like clock in, they don't want to do anything extra, which, not saying that everyone has to do extra stuff. They want to do their job and they just want to go home. And some people are like, oh, that's really terrible. They're not going to get ahead in life, and what a terrible thing to, think as an employee. And other people are like, oh, yeah, well, this has been going on for a long time. We're just giving it a name, and maybe owners need to step up and, recognize the value of their employees because now they're disheartened by not being recognized and not being rewarded for their work. I'm just curious what you think about this idea of quiet quitting and what can be done to sort of improve the morale of existing teams in coffee shops so that it's not just the owner taking on all of the responsibility, because people are people. They have a will. You can choose to your own behavior. But at the end of the day, like you said in the beginning, it's up to you to kind of set the environment and everything. So talk a little bit about that. I know it's kind of a big thing.
It's a great topic, and I could probably talk about it. I have a lot to say, but I'll try to be as concise as I can. I think the last few years, there was a big sense of, or a big feeling of, I want to hold on to who I have. I don't want to really disrupt the natural order of things. And so I'm going to actually take on your response. I'm going to take on these things. You don't have to worry about them.
Yeah.
And that was very much what we did, because a lot of it, we were so focused on protocol, cleanliness, COVID, just making sure that we were doing everything to ensure the safety and cleanliness of the space. And that was so much of a focus, it was a good focus to have, that we started to really remove things. We were a little bit lax on a lot of the things that we used to take very, very seriously.
Sure.
As far as reporting and reviews and, engaging employees and doing all the things that are essential. And so now that these are always parts of the responsibility. These were always listed as these are your duties, these are their job roles, but they weren't doing them.
It was on pause
because don't worry about it for now, we'll figure this out. And so now that we're like, okay, we're going to start to re-implement these things. And so now there's almost this sense of, oh, well, no, I'm not doing that because I wasn't doing that. And so I think that's what I think a lot of that has to do with. And so, but it's all about how it's being presented. I think we pay a very decent wage. Our tips, people are still making between $8 and $10 additional per hour at every shift. So our managers we believe that they're paid very competitively. They don't do scheduling. We do scheduling on a corporate. So there's a lot of things that they do, and they never did. And so we're not going to ask them to do that stuff. But if somebody is not willing to do the work, that's okay. Because we'll find somebody who does want to do the work and who's passionate about the work. And, there's always going to be someone who just wants to clock in and clock out. And that's okay. This guy I know, and he owns a dog walking company. And he says to his guys, as soon as they start working for him, he says, dog walks are 30 minutes. Are you going to be a 32-minute dog walker, or are you going to be a 28-minute dog walker? Because you can get away with both. You can get away with doing it for 28 minutes, and obviously you can get away with doing it for 32 minutes. Who are you going to choose to be? And at the end of the day, I want people who are going to be 32-minute dog walkers. I'll take a 30-minute dog walker. But if somebody is going to try to not work as hard, it'll show in the work. And it's just eventually, we'll find somebody who wants to do the work, who wants to be there. We want people who are excited about the work. And, if they want to do something else and they don't really want to be there, then it'll reveal itself.
Yeah. How much responsibility do you take over creating an environment where people are excited about the work versus who they are as a person?
I have to take all the responsibility at the end of the day. It's how we're engaging them and how we're showing them what's important to us. If we're not showing them what's important to us, whatever we deem as acceptable, that becomes the rule.
Yes.
Right. It's just, I love dogs. I think, I have a couple of pit bulls, and we can't have dogs in the store. It's a food service. It's a food service establishment. We can't have dogs. We can have service animals, which is fine. It takes every fiber of my being to not just get on my knees and start playing with the dog if I see a dog inside the store, even if it's a service dog.
Yeah.
I have to restrain myself because the minute I do it, someone else, an employee, they're like, he did it, I'm going to do it.
We're all doing it now.
So it starts at the top.
Yeah.
And it really, even in my office with my door closed, that any conversation I have with, whether it's on the phone or whether it's with Paul, that impacts what happens outside the door.
Oh, yeah.
It's
scary. It's scary. It's actually not scary because that idea of wanting to have control, we were talking about earlier, like we want to have control over this to a certain degree. You've got it. You can choose your words. You can choose your example. You can plan your presence.
Yep.
Right? And you can choose your team too. As you've been talking about, It's a good way to think about it, 28-minute versus 32-minute. And we take 30-minute people, and it's really hard not to make 30-minute people feel bad. Yeah, I don't think we should try to make them feel bad for doing their job.
They're doing their job.
Right. But 32-minute people are going to default to generosity where, your energy, if you're trying to get away with as little as humanly possible, you're probably going to underperform.
Yeah.
More likely to underperform. Yeah.
You can do the 30 minutes, right? And you can smile. Like, smiling is not extra.
Yeah.
You're not going above and beyond by smiling. I don't think we're expecting people to smile.
Yeah.
And I don't think that is saying go above and beyond.
No.
Just smile. Just be nice. That's it.
You
That's
want them
all
to.
You gotta be.
You told them to. You told them to say, hey, this is what we want. And they do it. That's the job.
That's the job.
Exactly. Yeah.
They can scowl. That doesn't work. It just doesn't work.
There's so much more to talk about, and I guess we could be here for another couple of hours, but that's why these sessions of yours are a couple of hours, is because there's a lot to talk about. So I guess then last little short words of wisdom for people to approach hiring. Number one thing to just kind of, for a mindset to walk away from this with and apply to their cafe, what would you say? Just a first baby step.
I would say the first thing is to really know what you need. Know who you need. Know how many people you need in order for your store to function fairly fluidly and well. A lot of times people don't even know what their labor percentage is to what their revenue is.
That's very true.
And you have to be armed with information. And once you know that, then you can start to make informed decisions, because sometimes you can be scrambling to find someone that you don't actually even need.
Yes.
So, we have really small stores, and then we have a couple of really big ones, and we have one big one which is, it's about 12, for us big is 1,200 square feet, which I think people are laughing at because they're like, that's like small.
Yeah.
Our smallest is, like I said, is 110 square feet, which we're opening soon, and then the average is about 400 square feet.
Yeah.
This big store that we had, it was one of the first ones that we built. It was before we really knew what we needed and how to build a store. And so the distance between the front counter and the back counter was about 7 feet.
Uh-huh.
So our employees were walking twice as much throughout the day as they would be if it was just 3 feet, which is fairly standard.
Yeah.
And so they were exhausted. And then it was a bigger space. They were constantly having to go out and clear the floor. And so we needed more people. So we were able to trim down the distance between the front and the back counter. And, you can actually eliminate, you can actually pull time off payroll because they're not as tired. It's really wild.
So it's just knowing, like you said, be armed with information. I like that. And know ahead of time what you need and that you actually do need it, and don't just trust your gut there. You need data to prove it, right?
Don't be like, I feel like we need a fifth person.
Yeah,
here.
your emotions will lie to you about these things. And you'll also try to mimic other people in their structures that you think, you need those things. So that's really good advice. Yeah. Well, it's been great to talk with you again.
It's always a pleasure.
Yeah. Where can people go to learn more about Birch Coffee and other things y'all offer?
birchcoffee.com. You can go check it out. There's the stores, and there's also our bags for sale.
Yeah.
And you can also check out our YouTube channel. So if you go to YouTube and you type in Birch Coffee, we love content. We love just making videos and having fun, and so that's always a great place to see what we're doing. And then obviously on the socials, on Instagram.
Cool.
Birch Coffee. So
sounds good.
Yeah, this is great. Always. Thank you.
Yes, indeed. Thanks, Jeremy.
Yeah. My pleasure.
All right. Well, like I said, there is a lot there, and I think it bears going through again, in fact, and listening again and taking notes, because this is stuff that Jeremy and the people that are in leadership at Birch have experienced a ton, and they've learned a lot through personal experience. And so you also can take what they've learned and be better for it. Jeremy is teaching on these things constantly at Coffee Fest. So if you're at the shows and you see Jeremy's name, go ahead and assume that you're going to get something great, just like you did in today's conversation. If you want more information about Birch Coffee, check them out over at birchcoffee.com. Follow them on Instagram and hit up Jeremy over on LinkedIn as well. You'll find notes again in the show notes. Huge thank you to Jeremy for sitting down with me and sharing all of this awesome and hard fought for wisdom. Now, finally today, we're going to be talking with Melind John. Melind is the son of Dr. Joseph John, who is the founder of Josuma Coffee Company. Melind runs the company now, and Josuma has been a fixture at Coffee Fest, I believe, since the beginning almost of Coffee Fest. I know ever since I've been coming, there has been a booth for Josuma Coffee, and there has been kind of a cult following of the brand, and they always have a class talking about espresso. what makes it beautiful, what makes it distinct, and what things need to be true in your coffee shop to be able to make a good shot of espresso. And no matter what we do, as we've talked about technological innovations, we've talked about sustainable relationships, we've talked about all of the conversations that have been happening over the decades, going back to the basics is always a great idea. This is why I'm thankful for the work that Melind and Josuma do by presenting this kind of content to Coffee Fest attendees. And the questions that they get and the hangups that they get are not so unique today as they were back in yesteryear in coffee. And that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk to Melind about the kinds of hangups that we have in making espresso in our cafes, the standout moments that he's had in his classes, delivering foundational espresso knowledge to the masses, and what we can learn from his experiences to go back to revisit and shore up the foundational elements of what makes espresso such a great thing in our coffee shops. And beyond just foundational espresso knowledge, we're going to be talking about the different factors that can throw you off, different origins, the water that you use, and much more. And that's a great way to end this series today. And so let's get right to it. Here now is my conversation with MelindJohn of Josuma Coffee. Melind, welcome to the show.
Yeah, Chris, pleasure to be here.
Yeah, ubiquitous presence at these shows. Of course, the company, I almost said Monsoon Malabar.
Yeah, no, I'm with Josuma Coffee Company, and most people come by and say, "Oh, are you Dr. John?" Which is my dad.
Yeah.
You're a lot younger than I would have thought. He was the guy that started Josuma Coffee and was doing the espresso lectures for, 20,
I have a little mug from way back in the day of the Monsoon Malabar, the gold espresso, and that was such a big part of my Coffee Fest experience when I was just coming here for the first time. But you all at Josuma have been teaching espresso at the show ever since then, and creating, I would say, kind of a bedrock of understanding for people about what makes espresso special and how they need to understand it as retailers. And so I wanted to kind of ask first a little bit about how, when you come to these shows and you prepare what you want to talk about, what are the main things that you want to cover, and how do you know that those are the right things based on the market today?
I think in maybe like the 1-2 sentence thing that we try to convey is that espresso versus drip coffee. 1, it can taste sweeter than drip coffee. 2, it can be a lot creamier in terms of the mouthfeel, and we think those are great things to experience. It separates espresso from drip coffee, and that a lot of cafes, a lot of roasters should be leaning into that because it makes espresso different and arguably better than drip coffee. And so that's probably the 1-2 statement bedrock of a lot of what we believe.
It goes beyond just saying, well, espresso is different than drip. What I heard you say today in your talk was that espresso can be better and maybe the best expression of coffee as compared to drip.
Yeah, I think that probably says it even better than I just did. Yeah, I mean, we sort of describe ourselves as being evangelists for the cult of espresso, where you believe because espresso can taste sweet and can have a tactile element that drip coffee doesn't have, it can be much, much better. Not just different, but also better. But there's the thing, in order to get that, to have a good drip coffee program, but also a good espresso program that leans into that, you almost have to think of coffee as coffee and espresso as espresso.
Okay.
And then in, maybe the last 10 or 15 years, one of the ways the trend in the industry has broken is to think of espresso as just another way to brew coffee. That you start with the bean and you figure out what you want to do. And that's almost the antithesis of what we believe. And so, our messaging is in more recent years kind of pushed back against that, where it isn't just about, focus on espresso and do it better, but now it's like, no, you need to think of espresso as completely different. Yes, it starts with the coffee bean. To be really great, it needs to move in a different direction. You almost need to just think of it as a different product to have your coffee mind for drip coffee, but your espresso mind, the espresso mindset for espresso.
Okay, and do people generally, instead of doing that, think of it as simply a vehicle for caffeine or an ingredient in a latte that is just kind of a utilitarian ingredient? It's because you talk about coffee mind and then espresso mind, and really that strikes me as really a great way to think about it, because the universe of things that need to be true for good espresso is so much different than drip. But if we just think about it as we just got to get this, like powerful coffee into our lattes so, we can make lattes, that maybe that does a little bit of injustice to what espresso is or can be.
Yeah, in terms of, there's always a segment of the market that will look at it, coffee or espresso as just a caffeine delivery mechanism or a way to get, a warm beverage into you, or just, not really for its pleasure segments. But that also applies to drip coffee. There's a lot of, it's just coffee. I don't need to know where the farmer is. I just need my caffeine hit.
Yeah.
And that part of the market, is, I don't know that they're receptive to our message. They're also not receptive to the quality coffee message. And so we don't really focus on that. But there is a segment that, does focus on, we want to have a really good drip coffee, but we find that, their espresso kind of lags. It definitely falls short of not tapping the full potential of espresso, not really bringing out sweetness, not really having, the tactile element, picking espresso that, oftentimes disappears once you add the milk, that you can barely taste it. And we're really trying to target those people, that they put some thought into their drip coffee to bring out flavor notes that people are looking for, or that maybe people haven't experienced, to try to have a more unique drip coffee experience. But, espresso, really isn't getting the bandwidth that it probably deserves.
Right,
One of the comments that I've been making in recent years is that if you look at a lot of bean companies, say roasters or importers, that in terms of bean sales, as an industry, half of all beans get used for espresso. But in terms of bandwidth, how much time do they spend on the marketing, on the hours of the day? They're probably spending about 80-90% of the days on beans for drip coffee. And they put in the work once on espresso and then don't really think about it as much. But espresso is half of the coffee bean market. Shouldn't they get half of your bandwidth?
Okay, yeah. And so what, kind of potential of, what's being left on the table in terms of what it could have been by now if we had appropriated that energy the way you're talking about. Okay, yeah, so now we're talking in this theoretical framework of understanding espresso and how to get in the right mindset, but in the practical world, we want to know how to do it, right? So break it down in terms of, as you've been talking with people who are in all different just stages of their business, what has been the most practical way of breaking down what contributes to the sweetest and best kind of espresso they can have for their menu?
I know. I think the way we describe it is get a sweet and creamy espresso to unlock, call it the full potential of espresso. Requires a roaster and any buyer of the beans from a roaster to nail the roast and nail the bean. That not every bean is going to make for a great espresso. A lot will be, not have much of body, and so you don't get that tactile element. Others will have, very sharp acidity, and so, even though you're doing the extraction correct, you're going to get a whole lot of the sour brightness that'll overwhelm the sweetness. And so not every bean can kind of work. And so in terms of picking beans, as a roaster, picking which beans to use for your espresso offering, not every bean is going to get you to sweetness, is going to get you to, a creamy, espresso that just coats your tongue. And trying to convince, cafe owners that you don't have to defer all the time to the roaster and say, well, when they say that this is, what espresso is going to be, that you should know that, hey, there is other options. There's better. Pushback is, hey, can you get, an espresso that isn't bitter or an espresso that isn't sour? We know that it exists, and we know, people, others can do it. Can you do that for me? And to be willing to say that, okay, well, I love your drip coffee. Maybe I'll work with you. And there's other roasters that their drip isn't as good as yours, but they're doing this in espresso, and to be willing to, to get the espresso you want from the people who can get it to you.
Sure. That's really, I think, especially the idea that, not everything makes for a great espresso, and that there is a certain sort of testing that you need to do, and investigation and curiosity that you need to have around whether it's going to work for your business and your drinks. You could come to a coffee fest like this and sample a lot of things, and you can taste coffee at a different cafe and find out who they use, but they have different water, they have different milk, maybe. They might pull it a different way and they're not telling you how. So you get it in your shop and you say, well, because it's this brand or because it's this origin, I know that that's for espresso. But like you say, it takes experimentation. So what may be a good way for people to organize their investigation into determining what the best first espresso blend is for them, or espresso or coffee origin that maybe they use for espresso? How should they organize their investigation in time? And then once they do have that under control, what then do they do to create understanding amongst their staff?
Oh, there's a lot in that question.
Yes.
In terms of espresso, the approach to espresso, I think can also be, extended beyond that in terms of, first, be willing to taste everything. So for espresso, one, it's, need to taste the straight espresso to know what you're starting with. And then if you want to know, how's it going to play in a milk drink, then, if you like the way the espresso tastes, then try it in a milk drink. And sometimes, you'll love the espresso, but you'll hate the milk. And maybe that, trying those two things is how you find out that, okay, that isn't the espresso for you. You would like it to be because it tastes so great as straight espresso, but in the milk it didn't work, and you just keep going. And then the other thing is when I taste coffee or just even other things, so I do like wine, so I try that, is just be very intentional what you're tasting. Try to, if you have a good memory for it, remember what you taste, or make notes if you don't have a great memory, and you'll sort of find little correlations that there's certain origins that you do like or don't like. If there's certain flavor notes that you really like, that you'll look for those, you'll discover that certain origins aren't so great for providing that, but others are, and you'll find the little correlations that exist within coffee. So a lot of people who know that, I really love a delicate floral note, a little bit of fruit, you can probably gravitate toward a Kenyan. Go to Brazil, you maybe struggle to find a delicate note like that. But other origins, they have their strengths and weaknesses, and sort of knowing what it is that you want, and learning from tasting and comparing, what taste do you find with this origin, what taste do you find with others, to be able to find, the coffee that you want.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of times it's the, okay, here's the beans, I would like to sell it, but I don't like the way it tastes. So when that's the case, it's like, you shouldn't be selling it. You should try to find here's a grower I like, or story that I like, and a flavor I like, and pair that. You don't have to take shortcuts, take compromises, and sort of just have a good idea of what it is that you want to sell. Like we pitch, espresso can be sweet, and we're looking for people who want it, but not everyone wants necessarily sweet espresso. Some people like espresso that's bright, and the espresso that we work with probably isn't right for them, but there's others that are. And so, every espresso needs to find his home. Every cafe owner needs to find their espresso. And we, just like to help people, I guess, sort of structure their journey.
Yeah.
That, we do have an end goal that we would love for them to get to, but we also realize that maybe that's not where they're meant to be.
Oh,
and
sure, sure.
Help them understand, how to, taste a whole lot, know what you like, and learn that, here's the segment of the coffee universe that'll get you the coffee or espresso that tastes the way you wish espresso would taste.
Well, that's really interesting, because a lot of people convince themselves against their own judgment, like their own taste, that they know they don't like it, but they put it in there because I think they should have it, but they're not going to be as much of a cheerleader for their own menu as they should be because of that.
Yeah, I've heard that a lot. We've been around for a while, and so we've talked to a lot of cafe owners, and there's a particular segment, the former cafe owners. So they had a cafe.
Yeah.
It's always tough to open, some sort of struggles, and then they made some compromises, and lasted for about 2 years and then failed. And one of their biggest regrets that a lot of them say is that I wish I had made different choices, gone with my gut. It's like, here's a roaster or a bean I wanted to serve, but I didn't know if it would succeed. I opted for the safe choice, the popular roaster in my town, or the one that I would recognize, or the origins that people would recognize, even though I wasn't that thrilled with it. And the point is I wish I'd gone with my gut, gone with what I like. I may have failed, but I would have had no regrets. Now I've failed, but I've got regrets, because I failed not selling the product that I wanted to sell.
Yes. Okay. So go through this process preemptively. You're going to save yourself a lot of pain. And you could probably apply this process to drip coffee too. And chai.
Yeah.
And
or with anything.
bagels.
Yeah, anything in the cafes where I wanted to structure it a certain way. I just wanted a small coffee counter to go only, but my partner was like, oh no, we need to have a lot of seating for people to seat there, and the rent just killed us. But it was like, I didn't really want to do a bigger cafe. I just wanted a counter. I mean, there's a lot of things that you have your vision, and for out of fear that it's going to fail, you do something that you think will succeed better. And if it doesn't, then you kind of regret it, because when you do what you want to do and it fails, it sucks, but you don't really regret it. It's like, I gave it my full effort. I did what I wanted. It hurts that it didn't work, but you go away with no regrets. I'm not sure I would have done things different. When you don't do your own vision and it fails, that's even worse, because you're like, I would have liked to have known if my vision had an audience.
Yeah, it's true. And then there's the balance of what we were just talking about, which is putting a framework on how you make good decisions based on your menu and your audience. And there is the idea that you could just kind of shoot from the hip and be like, my gut says, but I'm not educated in this at all. I'm just trying to figure it, I don't know anything about coffee, but my gut says I should serve this as an espresso. And that's not really what we're talking about necessarily. I mean, maybe gut needs to be a more informed gut.
Yeah. I mean, all decisions, in different industries, it's a mix of your head and your gut. I came out of finance where a lot of decisions were like 80% head, but the gut's got to get you to that final 20 yards. And there's other industries where, the head gets you 20 yards, but the gut's going to get you the other 80. But you need to sort of pair it together. That, I think this is where I want to go, and try to find, the thought process that supports it. And if you can't find the thought process, then there might be something wrong with your gut.
Yeah, you need some probiotics or some gut microbiome for business. That's not going to sell well as a brand, I don't think. So I think what I'm interested in here also is the idea of questions that people ask you a lot when you have these talks. Because I know you leave time for Q&A at the end. And when you're doing Q&A, what are the most frequent questions that people have about espresso?
I don't know if there is a most frequent. I get a lot of different questions coming out of the talks. So a lot of questions about sort of origins, origins they should look for, or a lot of times people have a cafe, they want to have an origin focus because they have family from there, or they sort of went there and are kind of struggling of what's the limitations of that origin. Can I want to have certain style of espresso and a certain style of drip, but can my origin do that? I mean, I think our concept is that not all beans and not all origins are meant for all purposes. Definitely rings a bell. And so in the class we get, that's probably the most common, but it's we do get a lot of different questions all over the place. Mm-hmm. For a while we were getting a little bit out of the talks, but a little bit more at the booth was the why does my my favorite cafe's espresso taste sour?
Yeah,
that was coming up a lot when brightness was a trend. You're seeing now roasters finding ways to, it seems to be like more through the way they brew espresso to try to tamp down the brightness a little bit. You're seeing longer shots, pulling a 2 or 3 ounce to try to tamp down the brightness versus switching around the beans or the roast to do that.
Anything to just keep the bright coffee. You don't want to change the roast, God forbid. Yeah. You don't want to develop that coffee a little bit more. Are you sure? You just want to do a coffee shot?
Yeah.
Okay.
Or just add another bean. Put in a little bit of Brazil or the Indian Malabar that we work in, to just mute it down a little bit. You'll still get the same flavor, just not 100%. It'll be at like a 70% level.
Yeah. And so that's interesting that people would make that distinction, and also the trend of bright is now being replaced by the trends of blends. And the trends of developed coffees. Developed coffees and blends are making a big comeback, and I think because of the pendulum swing that we did when we first got into, like when pour-overs first started happening, and everyone was like, don't ever do blends, do single origins, pour-overs, and we just completely went extreme, and now we're like, maybe we alienated a few people in that time, customers especially, who really just like coffee to taste like coffee sometimes, and not just like grapefruit juice.
Yeah, and the other advantage of the blend is if you know what you're doing, you can offer a certain flavor profile year-round.
Yeah.
With single origin, you're kind of stuck where customer discovers a coffee, but 3 months later it's gone. Maybe a year later, it's like, hey, is it coming back? It's like, oh no, we couldn't get it. But a lot of times, you make a great first impression, and then every impression thereafter is disappointing because you've got different coffees. But a blend, some people do want different things. Other people just want the same thing over and over. And the blend definitely helps getting that same thing over and over. So you create a flavor profile that you like, that you can replicate with a bunch of different coffees as things change. If the customer likes it the first time, in March, they will love it again in June. They'll love it again in September. They'll love it again in December, and the next year in March as well.
Yeah, stability. It really can't beat it.
Yeah, and it doesn't stop you from serving the single origin. Having different coffee that you feature. Some customers do want something different every time they come.
Yeah.
And there's two different customers, and you have two different offerings for them.
Yeah, and the stability offers a lot of freedom to experiment.
Oh, yeah.
For sure. Well, Melind, thank you for being here with me on my little table here in my booth at Coffee Fest.
No, my pleasure.
Where can we learn more about Josuma and what you do?
Yeah, so we do have our website, josuma.com. That's J as in Joseph, O, S as in Stephen, U, M as in Michael, A.com.
Okay, excellent. Well, thank you for all the information, and until we meet again at another Coffee Fest.
All right, we'll see you at the next show.
Well, I hope that you enjoyed that conversation. It definitely spanned a bunch of different topics that I think are always relevant for our coffee shops, and being in tune with all of the elements that impact the flavor of our coffee and the consistency with which we deliver great espresso to our customers. That is the name of the game. And I'm grateful for Melind sitting down with me to talk about all of these things, and for the class that he teaches at Coffee Fest. Check them out when you're there at the show, and definitely go to the website for more information about Josuma Coffee at josuma.com. And with that, that is the end of our series. We had these 2 parts, and we covered a bunch of subjects. There's so much to cover, and I'm excited for this year because that's exactly what we're going to be doing for the remainder of the year. Every Coffee Fest, we're going to have basically a 2-part live series for New York, Louisville, Kentucky, Anaheim, and also in Orlando. So we can get those all done and out in 2023. I think we'll be doing good. We got these out kind of the next year, kind of close to 2022, right? So each Coffee Fest is going to have its own live episode, so expect to see that some short time after the Coffee Fest show actually gets finished. Thank you all for joining me. Don't forget to subscribe to Keys to the Shop. Share these episodes with your friends, with your team, also on social media. That is a great way to help Keys to the Shop spread around the world. Thanks again, and as always, I hope that this episode has truly given you keys to the shop.